Welcome to Runes of Silvertree. This is Silvertree here. Wholeness to you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. So as we start off this month of November, a lot of energy has passed through the past month in October, and so may this message find you well and whole, and may it give you a little direction, a little guidance on your journey of life. So it's one thing. It's like, wisdom is a very interesting thing, because wisdom comes and is birthed from the space of confusion, from the space of not knowing what to do when all is lost. And that's kind of the space that I was in, and I'm still kind of working through. And hopefully by the time you receive this message, I've gotten through a lot of it. But again, I'm a firm believer of the ebbs and flows of life, and that everything's a big cycle, right? Everything is connected, interconnected, interdimensional. We always, if we haven't or are having a hard time processing certain experiences, processing certain energies on our path, on our life path, we tend to revisit them. And so we tend to revisit them through our relationships, through our line of work, through our day-to-day life. And so recently, I've moved back to my hometown, I've moved back to my home state, and it's been very challenging working through a lot of things that, when you're alone and you stay to yourself, especially during the pandemic, many of us who were single at the time, you just had yourself, and guess what? You're really good at arguing with yourself, right? But not so good, when you involve yourself with other people, especially if you have history or it's someone completely new. But I recently had a discussion with a very, very dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, and I was, going over a lot of the stuff that I've been going through, dealing with past relationships and how to incorporate it and integrate it in my present relationship, and it's just been a mess. I want to try to keep a healthy boundary when it comes to my private, personal life and with my audience. Because again, I believe that there are things that are happening when it comes to uploading a lot of our personal information. And I just, you have to be very, very conscious of what you're sharing with the world, because it's something. And in the future, I will dive deeper into this, but as of right now, I wanted to just share with you something that I've realized. And when you're giving someone advice and you realize that you're the person that needs the advice that you're giving, that's wisdom to me. That's when wisdom is in the works. And so the title of this video is that our relationships in our life are our spiritual practice. Now, most human beings, either they're following a very strict religious path or spiritual path, the Eastern, I like to call the Eastern or non-Western spiritual practices, okay? Whether that's African spiritual practices, Asian spiritual practices, Native American spiritual practices, just non-Western, non-European practices, or the monotheistic, religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, okay? But typically, most people in the world, we all come from, we may not be currently practicing these things, but we come from some form of foundation or lack thereof. Absolutely no spiritual background, secular, atheist, agnostic, right? It's very, very, we all come from something, the foundation of that. With that being said, I grew up as a Muslim American, okay, multi-generational. So my grandfather converted to Islam. My mother was then raised that way. Everyone, as they became adults, went their separate ways, and she went back and forth with Christianity and Islam for a number of years. However, with that being said, I was raised in a Muslim community and with Muslim beliefs, very heavily influenced in the Islamic way and traditions of life. It was very interesting growing up as not only being female, but also being melanated being a black woman in a Western world, and also being, practicing a religion from the Middle East, or that growing up in a country where Christianity is the dominant practice of faith. And so I had a very interesting cultural mashup growing up. But then I went about, my own spiritual journey at really beginning at the age of 20, I think 19, 20, 21. And, you become a seeker, right? You want to seek the truth. So you look outside yourself for the truth, and you try all these little things, like from Kundalini yoga to crystals to essential oils to tarot, to all these different modalities of trying to find spirit, trying to connect to consciousness itself, just so that you can know who you are, to remember yourself. And I've come to the conclusion, and this is going to help. I really, 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 really hope and pray that this truth will help you, this little piece of wisdom. Our main spiritual practice in our lives is the relationship we have with other human beings. That is the spiritual practice itself. I used to think that, spiritual practice meant getting up and meditating for a half hour to an hour twice a day. I thought that spiritual practice meant having a sadhana. I thought that meant, spiritual practice meant, learning all about the energy centers, the chakras. I thought that spiritual practice meant, studying all of the different modalities and the mystics and the sages and becoming one, and, what they call witchcraft and all these other things. I thought that that's what spiritual practice meant for the standard human being, the true seeker. But it truly is, the real practice is with how we interact with the human beings that we surround ourselves with, whether that's your mother, your father, your relatives, family, your best friends, your enemies, complete strangers, your lovers, the people you work with. They are your spiritual practice. Treat your marriage like it's a spiritual practice. Treat your parenthood like it's a spiritual practice. When you look back at your childhood, give it a spiritual perspective, in a way, or look back at what it's taught you, right? How we interact with our children, with our spouses, with our partners, with our strangers, with our neighbors. It really gives me, anyway, personally, a widened perception of what it truly means to be human anyway. Because how can anyone call themselves conscious and aware and awake and spiritual, and yet their relationships suck? And what does that mean? I mean their perception of the things that happen between themselves and the person that they're connected to. What is their perception of their mother, of their father, of their ex-lover, of their enemy, of their best friend, of a stranger in the street, of a person who's from a completely different part of the world? What's the perception? What's your perception of the people in your life, or lack thereof? A lot of the time and I'm guilty of this, I did this for 6 years before meeting my partner. I'm like, no, I am student of Source. I am married to Source. I am married to all that is, and I'm not going to close the door on relationships completely, but this is it. I give myself to Source, and then comes a partner, right? And then comes me having to move back, not having to, but choosing to move back to Indiana, where I'm from, and having to revisit lost parts of myself, or forgotten, or repressed parts of myself that I thought 6 years being away from home, I thought I evolved from. I thought that I processed, but really I just left parts of myself here so that I could rediscover forgotten aspects of myself, right? I left the hurt and painful things here and relationships that challenged me here so that I can go and discover other parts of myself that either I haven't explored, I haven't gotten tuned with, or that were repressed, or I couldn't stay here in order to discover those other parts of myself. But now that I have rediscovered those parts of myself, those parts of the aspects of my own consciousness, and having to come back to revisit these relationships, my parents, my siblings, all these things, it's very, very, very complex. And you're sitting here wondering, like, oh my gosh, well, does this mean I have to talk to, an abusive spouse or ex-spouse? Or does this mean I have to talk to, a troubled sibling? Does this mean I have to do all this thing and involve myself and immerse myself into a toxic space and a toxic place with people just, kind of holding me back? No, it doesn't. This means shift your perception of the relationship, because it's a spiritual lesson. It's going to keep repeating itself unless you can shift and perceive the bigger picture. And here's the thing, when you're treating something like a practice, like a spiritual practice, right? Because I've met all kinds of people who are, people of the book, a Catholic, I've met, Baptist, I've met, Jewish people, a Jewish practicing Jewish person, I've met a Hindi, I've met all kinds of witches and warlocks and sorcerers and all kinds of stuff on my path, and they get just super hype, like, oh, I'm spiritual, oh, my practice, this is me, this is who I am. And it's like, what? Now I'm asking myself to question, like, what's their relationship with the people closest to them? What's their relationship with the strangers and the people that they interact with on a daily basis? Because that is what tells you what truly is going on with the person that you have a relationship with. What is their perception of other human beings? That's a great compass to use when, practicing. Because then you can see, oh wow, like this person seems very angry about their past, very angry about their parents, very angry about their siblings. They feel very depressed about ex-lovers. They feel very anxious about, their coworkers. And it's like, when you step back and you see, when you ask yourself how you feel about the people that you're related to or that you're involved with, it really